Hello, please do press the like button and subscribe. I am very honoured to have with me Dave Ward from the Communication Workers Union, one of the big unions here in Britain, representing from postal workers, telecommunication workers, one of the fighting unions in this country. It's a union which is prepared to go out, not just organise huge numbers of workers, but to actively fight and win things, which we're going to talk about, actually, Dave, because I think in these times, people do want glimmers of optimism to hang on to. But anyway, Dave, great to see you.
And you, Owen. Really looking forward to having a good chat about all of the things that are going on at the moment. There's lots that we can talk about, and let's cover everything.
We will, yeah. I mean, these are tumultuous and disastrous times, and that's just the Labour Party. We'll come on to that. Yeah. Just before we'll talk about Labour and Keir Starmer later. We are talking about that, everyone, just so we know. I just want to kick off. Look, this has been, in terms of for workers in this country, we had the whole clap, didn't we? The minute everyone clapped out their windows, doorsteps, balconies, whatever, including Tory ministers who'd spent the best part of a decade attacking the terms, conditions, wages, pensions of many workers, but also private sector CEOs, I would imagine, private sector managers. I mean, just talk about what what a lot of your workers have had to go through. What would you sum up as being the experience a lot of them have had to have? And how do you feel about the fact that maybe some of their employers have been clapping them as key workers, and how does that gel with how they treat them?
Well, I mean, first of all, as a leader of the CWU, I'm immensely proud about the work that our members have done throughout the pandemic. So pretty much all of CWU's membership have been designated as key workers. And when it comes to the type of work that they do, postal workers obviously are out delivering every single day of the week. They have a special bond with customers. And I think what the pandemic has shown is that they pretty much own trust on the doorstep. And I think they've almost been a lifeline for a lot of people. If you imagine, people living in remote areas where they're not getting to see anybody, vulnerable people, a postal worker could well be the only person that you're really going to see during the course of the day. So I think they've done a fantastic job, certainly enhanced their reputation in society, as all key workers have. And, I think it's been a mixture of things. It's been very difficult with our postal members initially. A lot of battles over PPE. Interestingly enough, from what we observed, maybe a little bit before that debate was taking shape in the NHS, because I think we have good engagement with our members. So our members turned to us, and the union got battered a bit initially around should our members be working. The position that we took on that, as always, is a position where, we made it clear that if the PPE wasn't there, then our members wouldn't work. We didn't wait for ballots or anything like that. We just said that's the reality of it. And we had a lot of workers in some offices up and down the country who did decide that they weren't going to work on certain days because the PPE wasn't there. But we overcame that, and I think they've done a job where, I'll come on to talk about the agreement that we've reached with Royal Mail during the course of the pandemic. Significant victory for our union and for the movement. Our BT members as well, our telecom members, you wouldn't have all of these Zoom meetings if it weren't for CWU members who keep the country connected online. I think you wouldn't have homeschooling if it wasn't for the reality of the work that our members do. So again, they've gone the extra mile. Now, BT, we're on the brink of a national dispute with BT. And I think you make a good point about companies, politicians clapping people and then betraying their workers. And what's happened in BT is that, unfortunately, they're one of those companies that has definitely betrayed the workforce. So they've been out there, they were putting out stuff initially saying that their workforce were true heroes. At the same time, they was bringing in a £5 billion transformation cost-cutting programme that has resulted in compulsory redundancies for the first time in our history with BT, has resulted in them serving notice on voluntary terms, good terms that the union had negotiated, has resulted in them serving notice on a pensions agreement, has resulted in them closing sites up and down the country willy-nilly. And this is all from a company that when you think about building back better and what it might mean, or what it should mean, this is one of the biggest companies in the UK. And you've got a CEO who, he seems only interested in hitting numbers, which are obviously about, rewarding shareholders. And this is a company that should be part of the growth of the economy. And instead it's scaling back. And, we've got no option but to take this company on. I do think there's a real problem in society with companies and their leadership. Not everyone, but there are certainly leaders around at the moment in the business world who need to be held to account and give something back with their company to their workforce and to society. And unfortunately in BT at the moment, that's not happening.
So what would your message be to the CEO, Philip Jansen of BT? Because you're talking about, the first strike in 4 decades?
Yeah.
Thousands of compulsory redundancy, hundreds of site closures during the biggest emergency since World War II. Lovely stuff. What's your direct message to the CEO of British Telecommunications?
Well, I think the direct message is we're balloting our members for industrial action. We'll win that ballot. We'll get support for our members. And he either needs to do a proper deal on the future of the company, stop the compulsory redundancies, engage with the union on how the future, give workers a greater say over the future of the company, or he needs to move on. And I suppose the big message to him would be in the postal dispute that the CWU dealt with in the pandemic, we did actually move on the CEO of the company as part of that dispute. So I think he needs to listen, and it's time for him to get round the table and negotiate a proper agreement.
So in terms of, workers already had, a lot of working people had a bit of a kicking for the last decade or so, the longest squeeze in wages since the Napoleonic War, which was a fair while ago. We're talking
200 years at least.
Best part of 200, literally over 200 years ago now. Yeah, since that war with Napoleon. So I think we can agree that's a long time. But also often for many workers, especially younger workers, more precarious terms and conditions. This promotion of insecure working, 0 hours and so on. So you're talking about this new deal for workers, which sounds very, very, very ambitious. With the Trade Union Congress, for those who don't know what that is, that's the national body which almost all unions, not all, are affiliated to. It's the federation of unions in this country. What exactly are you calling for, and are you confident it will have the support of other unions?
Well, first of all, I think that it's important that we discuss, why we need a new deal for working people. And for me, you touched on one issue. We've had the longest wage squeeze for over 200 years in this country. The whole economy has been built for the last couple of decades on insecure employment models. And those models, anybody who deals with the world of work at the moment and with companies, the big companies, all of them do it. They all attempt to bring in contracts of employment. People talk about 0 hours contracts, but there's a whole world of contracts for employees at the moment that are nothing like when I first started work. There's short-term contracts, there's specific event contracts. Of course, most of them have no holiday pay, have no sick pay, there's no proper pensions. And coming into the pandemic, there's something like 8 million people in this country who were working and living below a living wage, were earning less than a living wage. And, for me, this is a key fight for any trade union leader at the moment. And what we're saying is, can we reshape the whole world of work in this country? Can we as trade unions come together under the banner of fighting for a new deal for working people? And I say this distinct from the Labour Party. I see this as a very distinct trade union agenda. I also see it, by the way, as an opportunity to build new models of collectivism in the country. So it doesn't have to be restricted to trade unions. It doesn't have to be restricted to trade union members, workers anywhere. Some of the groups that are emerging in society where I do feel quite confident that there's almost a rebirth of collectivism taking place as a result of this pandemic. There's room here for us to build this movement around an agenda of changing the world of work. I think it's also about making sure that in doing that we address some of the big issues that we're going to be facing. So the climate emergency. So clearly, a new deal for working people means supporting the need for a new Green Deal. We also face, coming out of the pandemic, something that is not spoken about enough, the fourth industrial revolution, the use of technology. Mm-hmm. And if we don't fight for workers' rights now and enhance workers' rights, it's not about defending workers' rights for me, it's about actually improving them, then we are not going to be able to deal with these problems. And I think the trade union movement, different to perhaps politicians, politicians to me, too many of them, they do politics in their head, in theory. We can do it on the ground. And what I'm committed to, and I believe that other trade union leaders are now looking at, is us coming together and actually making change happen, even with a Tory government. I think we can do that. I really do. And I think we've got to develop it around 3 or 4 different points. So one of them for me would be common bargaining agendas in sectors of the economy. We should be working with other trade unions to set standards of employment across sectors of the economy. Owen, that the postal and logistics sector, the parcel sector, has exploded. But it's one of the areas that is absolutely covered with jobs on low terms and conditions, low pay, insecure employment, bogus self-employment. Well, we've got to do something about that. We're not waiting for the Labour Party to do something about that. We have to do something about it. So common bargaining agendas across sectors of the economy, taking on the multinational companies, who owns technology, giving workers a greater voice over what happens in the direction of their companies. These are all things that we can put together. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say that's really important is that we end internal competition in organising workers. There's been too much of unions fighting against each other as to who organises workers. And I'm up for a debate across the movement on new models of how we go about organising workers in the private sector in particular. The third thing is we do have to sit down and agree what our key industrial and political demands are. And that's a debate that the movement needs to have. And the fourth one, the most important one of all, is we've got to mobilise workers behind that agenda. And I do believe that can be done, even during this pandemic.
So before I ask you about the broader future of the Labour movement and how it can, I suppose, change, how it can win over particularly younger workers whose lives are very tough, but many aren't in unions. We'll talk about that. But in terms of Royal Mail, tell us a bit about what's happened there, because I think a lot of people, when they hear about workers going on strike, in their head, they always associate it with defeats. I mean, they think of, maybe a younger audience watched Pride and saw, amazing film about the miners' strike where the miners got clobbered, and the union movement never recovered from the miners' strike in the mid-1980s in lots of ways. And what we don't often hear about, we hear that glorious defeat, as it was sometimes referred to, but when miners so courageously fought for their communities and their lives and were smashed. But people don't think of actually there are these victories that are taking place because of unions organising in the here and now. So just tell me a bit about what's happened with Royal Mail, because that's been a long and arduous struggle that's taken place. But where do things stand?
Well, we've secured a really good agreement during the pandemic, and essentially, it's been a struggle from the moment that the pandemic started, because you may recall that we'd actually just announced the result of a ballot for industrial action. We got a 97% yes vote. And we got, I think it was around about 75% turnout. So we smashed the Tory anti-trade union laws. We took a decision that it would have been wrong at that point, even with that backing of the membership, to have launched into strike action at that point in time, even though we had that mandate, because we recognised that the role of postal workers and the work they do was going to be really important. We actually said to the company, you should be putting postal workers forward now as an additional emergency service almost during the pandemic. And that was part of a strategy of us to enhance the role of postal workers. And we were up against the CEO, who clearly his plan kind of got uncovered. It wasn't what he was saying initially, but it became clear what he was doing was he was about to abandon Royal Mail as we know it, and he wanted to set up the company as just another parcel courier. And in doing that, he was going to set up a separate parcels company. And over a period of time, he was going to introduce new workers into that, new terms and conditions lower than what we've negotiated for our members. And essentially, his strategy was to let Royal Mail wither on the vine, and anything that was going to grow, i.e. parcels, he was going to push it into a new company. Back to that classic moment that all of these CEOs who don't have an interest in workers, only in hitting the numbers and making profits for the shareholders and themselves, classic strategy. So we made it clear we weren't accepting that. And, we had some moments during the course of that where our members got behind us. It wasn't done as in terms of legal action. And people made it clear on the ground that we weren't going to accept that. They were trying to introduce changes and people just weren't going along with it. And what I've got to say about our union, which is unique in some ways, because of the structure of Royal Mail, where we've got workplaces across the whole of the country, in every town and city and in villages, in some cases, is we've still got workplace reps who have power, where the manager has to sit down and negotiate with them. And one of the things we did as a union when Royal Mail was privatised, we weren't defeated by privatisation. We had a strategy to protect the workplace structure and to fight for it no matter what. And that came into being. The CEO was forced out. There's no two ways about that. We forced him out. He lost the confidence of some of the board members. And ultimately, through the course of that, we negotiated an agreement that completely changed that strategy. And now means that in terms of trying to grow the business, it's going to be done with the existing workforce. We're going to expand the role of postal workers. A lot of people have written off the industry because letters are in decline. We've managed to now say, well, actually, your greatest asset is your frontline worker. So why not build your strategy for the future around somebody who owns trust on the doorstep? And we can put forward more products and services. We want postal workers to have the opportunity to work with councils in supporting vulnerable people. We're going to develop ideas around this in supporting local businesses, tailored services. The key thing for us is that postal workers themselves can create that agenda, and that's what the agreement has done. On top of that, we got a 2-year pay deal worth over 6%, and we got an hour off the working week. We've got job security guaranteed for another 2 or 3 years where nobody will be made redundant. And actually, we're just now seeing signs of the industry growing again. So it was a very significant victory that doesn't often get talked about too much. And it's a victory that we've had several times because, and I will make this point, we as a union were never going to be defeated by privatisation. We had a strategy to deal with that. We've stopped the company franchising. We've stopped them outsourcing. They've not introduced 2-tier terms and conditions. And it's been an ongoing struggle and an ongoing strategy backed by our members, backed by workplace trade unionism, is the truth.
Before I ask about Labour with a capital L, younger workers have suffered disproportionately. They have been expected to pick up the tab for the financial crash. They suffer a housing crisis, insecure work, saddled with debt if they went to university, youth services slashed, public services they depend on slashed. They were promised a better life than their parents. To put it bluntly, that is not going to happen. And yet, we see in general elections, more under 40s vote for Labour than have ever voted for Labour under the age of 40 in the history of British democracy. Yet most of them aren't unionised. What can happen to change that? How can unions adapt change to ensure that younger workers, who are often the most insecure and have been clobbered so badly, are in a union? What has to happen?
I think we need to, first of all, recognise that it can't be done with unions acting in isolation. So I think this is where the trade union movement has to come together now. I mean, a trade union should, and in many cases does, bridge every divide in society. And surely our number one job at the moment is to fight to change the balance of forces in the world of work. Everybody talks about what those problems are, and it's our job to change it. And I think that starts by willingness to be working together to harness our strengths. I think there's some great unions around. I think there's some great union activists around. But for whatever reason, we've failed to bring the union movement together as a collective force. Well, the first thing we've got to do is achieve that. This is why I think having an overarching campaign for a new deal for working people that would relate to all of those people who are suffering in the world of work at the moment, and particularly young people. I think that is the byproduct of that. You bring trade unions together, you set out that agenda for the private sector as well as the public sector, and you organise workers. I think the second thing we've got to be prepared to do is be more out there. You've often mentioned about the CWU and its engagement with people. I think union leaders have got to be more accessible to workers. I think that means trying some new ways of engaging with people. I mean, I'll tell you what I'd like to see. I'd like to see every union branch in the country, in whatever union you're in, holding a meeting with members, making that accessible to people in those areas to come onto that meeting and start talking about, we're going to fight for a new deal for working people in this country. I think we need to be open to different models of collectivism. I think what's happened in the movement, understandably, I suppose some unions as membership has declined, although it's starting to show that, we're starting to grow again, which is a great thing. I think we've perhaps been drawn into the debate about you merge with other trade unions, but you do it normally, unfortunately, for financial reasons. And I'm not saying that big unions are the answer or small unions are the answer. I'm saying we've got to collectivise our efforts. I've heard debates before about, on the left, which I would class our union on and myself, people talk about we've got to have a general strike. My answer to that is you've got to build something first before you move on to really showing your real power. And I just don't think we've spent enough time talking about how we mobilise workers. So we've got to have a distinct trade union agenda, not wait for politicians to change things, to reassert trade unionism in this country, but be open to supporting all forms of collectivism. I mean, there's some great models of collectivism that are emerging out of the pandemic. The renters associations, been around for a while. The food bank organisations, these can be part of trade unionism, not with us taking them over, but with us working with them. And I think that's the agenda for me going forward. It's what I spend a lot of time thinking about, is how we truly going to build our movement and shift the balance of forces in society, in the world of work, in the economy. We've got to have a bold agenda when politicians, unfortunately, haven't.
Which is quite a good bridge, actually, to the next question, which is, and it's funny, actually, because there's one that's my cat, Keir, who is a cat of vision and determination and leadership. So that's that Keir. In terms of Keir Starmer, how is he doing? And I suppose just to follow up on, just to be specific about how he's doing, A, how much has he stuck by the promises he made during the leadership election? And B, what the hell is his vision for the country, Dave? Because I don't know. It's my job. I'm a political journalist. It's my job. I know, I've spent all my adult life in and around the Labour Party. I know, like yourself, most of the leading lights of the Labour Party. It's not like I haven't tried to work out what the vision of the Labour Party is. I just don't know what it is. And I think more worryingly, I don't think they know either. So how is he doing? Is he keeping to his promises? That was probably a bit leading. I'm sorry, but I'm frustrated. And what the hell? What's the vision? What do they stand for?
So I couldn't disagree with your assessment. I mean, for me, Labour is in danger of becoming completely irrelevant. I think it's in danger because this has been going on for a long, long time. For decades, I think Labour has been moving to this position where it seems to have forgotten that it's meant to be representing working class people. I think the only time that potentially changed was the Jeremy Corbyn leadership. Not saying Jeremy done everything right. There were clearly issues that had to be dealt with there. But at the same time, what was right was a very bold, transformative agenda. And I think you'll become irrelevant at the moment if you haven't got an agenda where people know what you stand for. And I suppose if you go back to Keir's part in this, and I'm not blaming him for all of this by any stretch, but, he stood on a ticket of essentially Jeremy and John McDonnell's and that Labour Party's manifesto. He pretty much promised what we would describe as a socialist transformative agenda. We certainly got pledges from him as a union. He wrote to us setting out the pledges. We've still got them. He stood on a ticket of doing those policies in a more effective way, a more professional way, and in a way that would become electable. And I suppose the final ticket he stood on was that he was going to unify the Labour Party. Now, by any measure, I think you'd have to say he's not achieved any of those goals in the last year. And I think he's in real danger now, politically. I mean, the Labour Party is tearing itself apart. It's quite obvious that there's a lot of pressure on him to move to the right. And I don't think that's going to work. I mean, as he's moving to the right, some people would argue that Johnson, on some of the policies, as it is stealing some of Labour's policies at the very time that Labour seem to be abandoning them. So all in all, I don't think they've worked out how to deal with Boris Johnson either. I think he's outmanoeuvring them. And, things like Captain Hindsight, whatever you think of Johnson, that's a great political line that I think is actually cutting through with people. And Labour at the moment, unfortunately, can't get in front. It's not easy. I'm not saying for 1 minute it's easy, but surely in the middle of a pandemic, with all of the imbalance of power and wealth in this country, in the world of work, in society, this is deep inequality that we're seeing. You talked about young people. I feel this all the time when I look at my own family and friends. We got to do something about this. That's the key question that faces the Labour movement, the trade union movement, the Labour Party. And at the moment, it's not stepping up to what it's going to do about it. And therefore, it's in danger of becoming irrelevant. The only thing I've seen recently is that, there seems to be now, the answer is to move to the right. The answer is to bring back, so we're hearing some of the old Blairites. I've heard Peter Mandelson.
Sorry, I was thinking
Peter Manson, I've heard, is now being, is undoubtedly, a clever guy, but I think from a different era. I think what Labour are missing is, I actually think people do want change, but you've got to lead that debate. You've got to show people what you stand for. And, if you look at Scotland, that's almost looking irretrievable and certainly wouldn't be settled until independence is settled one way or the other. I don't see a way back for Labour at the moment there. If you look at the red wall seats and up north, you see real problems emerging where Labour, I think over primarily Brexit, didn't capture the right position. And I just think generally, I don't know whether Labour is a working class party anymore. I'm being honest, to me, it looks like a middle class party. I just don't think it knows what it is and what it stands for. Therefore, it's becoming irrelevant. The polls are showing that. It's a big moment, I think. And that's why, as a trade union leader, I've always believed this anyway, I think we've got to do something about it. And this is what I would do. I would set out the agenda for all trade unions to come together, whether you're affiliated to the Labour Party or not, and start building our movement. I'm not talking about disaffiliation. CWU is not in that place. Some of our reps and members may want to discuss that. But I'd rather say this is what we're going to do and hope that the Labour Party follows that agenda.
But I mean, I couldn't disagree. Sorry, I couldn't agree more even. I mean, we've had one of the most catastrophic handlings of the pandemic on earth, one of the worst death tolls, one of the worst death rates, and one of the worst economic consequences. Because if you don't deal with a public health crisis, you end up with a worse economic crisis. It's not either or, they're both intertwined. We've had the calamity of test and trace, handed out to private contractors and so on, who've made a complete pig's ear of it. And yet, Labour haven't had a clear narrative on this catastrophe about how the Tories messed it up, and that's allowed a situation where a lot of people think, well, who could have done better? They were dealt a terrible hand. Labour haven't offered anything clear they would have done differently, and that leads people to feel resigned. And then they think Labour opportunistic because there's no overall message, so it just looks like kind of all capped in hindsight. That sets in. And equally, they're not putting forward any inspiring, coherent agenda alternative. The polling reflects that. The polling shows people don't know what Keir Starmer stands for. I don't think his team do, and I'm increasingly concerned he doesn't either. And the Labour's polling is falling badly, and that's before we have the mass opening up and, Boris Johnson rides a tidal wave of sunshine and optimism, which he's actually good at. That's his thing, really, as a politician. I suppose my question is, to you and the unions, is Labour clearly, they're in this position where they're not offering an inspiring alternative of any description. And because these are savvy Tories, what they do, as you said, is they actually just appropriate tinkering policies and repackage them as their own. So if Labour offers a very mild, modest tinkering package, the Tories will just take bits of it, and then Labour have got nothing left to say. But the Labour leadership will go, well, at the end of the day, the unions will kick off. They'll grumble, they'll say things in interviews, but they're not going to do anything. They're still going to give us the money. Obviously, the Labour Party, the clue is in the name, was founded by the trade unions to give a political voice to the organised workers' movement. What can you actually do? What can you and the other unions do to put pressure on Keir Starmer to abide by it? It should be emphasised, because some will say, well, come on, he won by a massive majority, but he won on the mandate which you've outlined, which is to stick to key core radical domestic policies. So how are you and the other unions going to force him to stick to that agenda? Well,
I think that for me, the priority is to develop a distinct trade union agenda to change the balance of forces in the world of work and in wider society. I think we have to do that now. And I think in doing that, I think that in itself will show a lead in taking on the big multinational companies, in taking on the insecure employment models that exist right across the UK, and having common bargaining agendas, we will set the direction. And what we hope from that is Labour will follow. What I would say to you is that, our union at the moment, we're about to have a discussion about our own political strategy. We've started that conversation, and, we're going to change our position. So what I mean by that is that I don't think it's appropriate for us at the moment to be giving our members' money to the Central Labour Party when it's in this place that, for me, it's not, achieving at the moment. And I think what that means is that we don't get into the debate at this stage of disaffiliation, because I'm not sure that actually does anything, but that we target our money to people in the Labour Party locally, metro mayors who are going to fight for our members' jobs, terms and conditions, councils that may support that, MPs that may support that. So for me, it's very much a thing of, supporting people who support us, making it clear to Labour that they're not going to get something for nothing. That ain't on. Now, where that leads, it'll lead, and I think we have got to be quite clear that that's the position we're going to take. That's what the CWU are going to be debating. So, for me, it's an agenda of making change happen, not waiting for the Labour Party to do it. I've got to say, I do understand that how difficult it is at the moment. And I think it does need a bit of a chat about strategies. I mean, for me, Labour cannot define itself under any one overarching agenda. It's got some fantastic activists, but it doesn't seem to be able to bring it together around what its key agenda is going to be for people. And, I think trade unions need to step up in that vacuum. And that's what I would argue is the priority. I also think that we don't want to get, I haven't got the energy or the time or the resources to get involved in factional fighting within the Labour Party. Our job is to represent our members, to enhance their pay terms and conditions and protect their jobs. And that's where our priority is going to be. We're going to be prioritising that. We always have. But I think all unions should be thinking about us as the opposition. And I also say that I don't want to get involved in factional fighting within the Labour Party because, we can't let the Tories off the hook. I mean, what you said, I find it incredible, really do, that somebody who spent his life, telling lies, who's been caught out so many times, can be seen as somebody who's going to change this country, when all of the evidence is during the pandemic that the Tories have pulled a free card trick. I mean, if it wasn't so sad and so tragic about what's happened with excess deaths in this country, track and trace, their procurement policy has been about making the rich richer, and we got to get out there and tell people that now. And I think we got to challenge them in a slightly different way. I think it's about telling people what we're going to do. Not always, perhaps, although I've just done it, what the Tories are doing. I think we've got to show people, particularly in parts of the country where we know the Tories have cut through in our traditional areas. We've got to offer those people a route back to believing that the trade union movement and the labour movement stands for them. It's a big job, but I think it's about doing things for me, not about arguing, the toss within the Labour Party. I've kind of not given up on that. I'm a Labour Party member, have been for years and years, and will stay that. I'm not into the, let's start a new party up at this moment. I don't think that. The evidence is it never gets off the ground. It's about what we do. We as trade unions have a responsibility to take this fight on, particularly in the world of work, for all the reasons you've highlighted. And if we're not going to do that, then we're not doing our job. And that's why I'd appeal to every trade unionist in the country, every worker. It's time for us to bring workers together. And, you know, I think we can do that with a bold agenda. And then my hope is that by doing that, the Labour Party will follow.
Cheers, Dave. Really appreciate you joining us and covering so much ground. From the small L Labour movement to the capital L Labour Party. It's a big privilege to have your insights. And it's very important that on this channel, not least, and this is an important point to make about our media ecosystem, the trade unions are the biggest democratic mass movement in the country. And yet on the BBC, on several major media outlets, you will hear the spokespeople of big business treated as impartial witnesses, often platformed, and yet the biggest mass democratic movement in the history of the country is not given the same airtime platform. So it's very important that that's counted. But I really appreciate you joining us, and I will see you soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Owen. And you're doing a good job in giving us that platform, and we appreciate that.
Not at all.
I haven't had a go at your hair either because I can't.
Honestly, it's so I'm counting. The 12th of April is going to be a big day. I'm not going to sleep the night before. It's going to be very, very exciting. I'm counting.
I'd rather look like you than what I do at the moment. Let's put it like
very stylish, and less hassle. Cheers, Dave.
All right. Cheers, Owen. Thanks a lot.
Please support this channel for independent thought, discussion of the most important issues that we face.